So my name is Nicole Brown. I am a culture writer and journalist from Los Angeles and the founder of Group Chat, which is a bi-monthly mixer and conversation series basically created so that we can all gather and spend time and have intentional conversations and connect in person. So I'm glad you're here. Thank you. And today I am speaking with Leah Thomas, who I will read from my phone to introduce. So Leah is an eco-communicator, which is a phrase I love. And you are a celebrated environmentalist based in Los Angeles. You've coined the term eco-communicator to describe your style of environmental activism and use your passion for writing and creativity to explore and advocate for the critical yet often overlooked relationship between social justice and environmentalism. Leah founded and launched the nonprofit Intersectional Environmentalist, a platform and resource hub that aims to advocate for environmental justice, provide educational resources surrounding intersectional environmentalism, and promote inclusivity and accessibility within environmental education and movements in 2020, which has since become a leading resource for diverse and accessible climate education. Building on your work in the field, there's so much, you're so brilliant and talented. Leah penned The Intersectional Environmentalist, which we have right here, How to Dismantle Systems of Oppression to Protect People and the Planet. The book serves as an introduction to the intersection between environmentalism, racism, and privilege, and as an acknowledgement of the fundamental truth that we cannot save the planet without protecting all of its people. Leah has been named to several notable lists, including Forbes 30 Under 30 2024, Time 100 Next, Insider's Climate Action 30, Marie Claire's Creators to Watch, Ebony Power 100, and InStyle's The Badass 50, and is an established public speaker who has presented at Apple, Google, 1% for the Planet's Global Summit, Meta, Dreamforce, Elon University, UCLA, and more. Her writing has appeared in a variety of publications, including Vogue, Elle, Marie Claire, Teen Vogue, The Washington Post, and High Snobiety. She has also been featured in Harper's Bazaar, W Magazine, and CNN, as well as ABC News, NBC, The Weather Channel, and numerous podcasts. Thank you, Leah.
Shout out to the Weather Channel.
Yes, essential resource. I guess I want to start this conversation by asking you how you first developed your relationship with the environment, even stretching back to childhood. I know that you're from St. Louis, and now you're based here in Los Angeles, and so I'm sort of curious about how you gained an appreciation for the environment and sort of how you feel about the Midwest as a region compared to the West Coast where you now reside.
Yeah, so I mean, I had a really Midwestern upbringing. Like, I was running around catching toads and things like that. But I never really thought of myself as an environmentalist. I just knew that I spent time like sitting on my grandma's patio or running around catching toads or like digging holes in the dirt because we didn't have much more to do, or, you know, exploring cornfields and stuff out in the suburbs. And then my grandpa had a farm in Arkansas. So I didn't really think I was an environmentalist, but I just was constantly surrounded by nature. And yeah, I wanted to be a veterinarian, and later on I discovered environmental science and I studied it in school. And I began studying environmental science the same year as the Ferguson uprisings in my hometown. So that kind of just jumbled everything together, and I thought, like, how can I help this movement that's emerging? And I thought, oh, maybe I could do something that's a little niche and study environmentalism to then maybe help social justice issues. It didn't make sense then, but it makes sense now.
Totally. Wow, that's beautiful and a powerful sort of like call to action or inspiration, which leads me to ask you about writing this book, The Intersectional Environmentalist, and sort of what inspired you to tell that story, because I mean, you cover so much in this text, but I think it was published at a really crucial time, and I know that it still is reverberating years later now. So I'm just sort of curious how you tackled this topic and sort of found your way through the writing process and the research process, and yeah, what you felt like you wanted to add to the canon.
I felt really lucky. I was 25 when I started writing this book, and it just felt like such an incredible honor. I had gotten my dream job. I was working at Patagonia headquarters, you know, like little puffer jackets. And I decided to leave, so I was unemployed at the time, and then I started talking about environmental justice on social media, and I couldn't have expected that this would happen, but I went viral talking about it. and I had the opportunity to write a book. So again, I was 25, unemployed, and then I just was like, if I have any opportunity to help people understand why you need to care about the advocacy of Black people and the environment at the same time, let me do it, and let me try to make it as accessible as possible. So the process of writing the book, it just felt like such a huge responsibility. I wanted to include as many diverse voices as I could, and I wanted to write the textbook that I wanted as an environmental science student, because a lot of folks, when they study environmentalism, they think, what does this have to do with the protection of humans? But I really wanted to make the argument extremely clear that I want everybody, especially Black folks, to have the right to breathe in every sense of the meaning of that. So whether it's clean air, living a joyful life, etc., and I just couldn't think of anything more urgent. I'm a shy person, so writing was just kind of my therapy.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, the right to breathe is something to meditate on for sure. I know in my introduction of you, I talked about how I love the term eco-communicator because I think it's so succinct but also broad in its implications. And so I wanted to ask you about like that role and that honorific in a way, and so sort of like how you feel, what your responsibility is to sort of dispel myths or stop the spread of disinformation online or maybe even in person that we might have about the climate and environment. Or maybe just like to help bridge the gap because there's a lack of education or awareness or knowledge many people have about the things that you talk about.
Yeah, so the thing that's, messed up, there's so much messed up about the world. I don't want to get super pessimistic. I'm actually an optimist, I swear. But the folks who are the least responsible for our changing climate experience the brunt of all of the hazards. So because of redlining and other terrible housing discrimination things, a lot of Black and brown communities, low-income communities, etc., are surrounded by toxic waste facilities, more highways. I think it's around 70% of African Americans live in a county that frequently violates federal air quality standards. But they don't talk about that when they talk about the fact that a lot of Black folks have asthma, etc. They almost like blame it on our community when there's all of these outside factors. So I think that's why I really wanted to make environmental education as accessible as possible, because it's affecting people down here on Earth. A lot of climate information talks about like there's greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and 1 point blah, 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 blah degrees Celsius, the world's gonna blah. And okay, I think we have a better shot of getting all of that gas out of the atmosphere if we can make sure that people down here on Earth have access to clean air, clean water, and a safe and healthy living environment. So I wanted to do that and just talk about it as much as I could. Like, I've shown up random places. I wrote an article in Playboy. I went to Coachella and was like, hey, listen to me, talk about it. And I just really think it's so urgent, and I want to make it as relatable as possible.
I love that you touched on that because I will admit I have been intimidated in the past thinking about capital C climate or capital E environment where it's like our planet is so vast. Like, how do we sort of like break down the issues into like a digestible thing to really feel like we can conquer and make a difference, because it does feel so much bigger than any one person. So yeah, it's great that you mentioned that because I do think like my sense is that a lot of people don't participate maybe in certain movements, not because there's not an interest or a desire, but maybe because like they just feel ill-equipped or like they're not gonna be impactful enough,
Yeah, and I think recontextualizing things is really important for me. And when it comes to Black history, like Black history is environmental history. And my favorite book, it's an anthology called Black Nature. And it's basically a collection of poetry over the last 100 years. And the woman who wrote it, Camille, who's just an amazing human being, made the argument that a lot of Black art and Black poetry is called like social justice, civil rights poetry. But she's like, whoa, so many of our stories are Black folks looking up at the stars, talking about their experience outdoors, using these beautiful nature metaphors and things. Like, we need to recontextualize this and say that this is also environmental storytelling, because if we do that, then people can see themselves reflected in it. So George Washington Carver did so much more than just things with peanuts, and the peanuts are some of the coolest, but he also is responsible for, CSA programs, essentially, or regenerative organic agriculture. Like, he was one of the founding fathers of that. So I think if we could really start to recontextualize Black stories and Black history as environmental history, a lot more people will know, like, environmentalism isn't just about, summiting mountains. That's really cool, but it's also about folks like the people at the Compton Community Garden, or just literally my grandma sitting outside on her porch soaking in the sun.
Beautiful. I feel like we're so on the same wavelength, because like I had a question about that kind of, but now it's out of order, but I love jumping around because you're just catching me in advance of my questions. Because I was thinking too, especially as we close out Black History Month, but I was thinking about how Black history and like the story of like our ties to the land and agriculture, especially in this country, those are so deep. And I feel that maybe in some ways we've like lost our way or become more distant because it's not forced servitude and laboring for free and tilling the soil in that way as like our history has demanded that we do. But I have been thinking too about how like I do feel that a reconnection to the land, or like environmental storytelling, as you say, feels like a real honoring of our ancestry. And like, even if we're not necessarily all environmentalists or like well-versed in agriculture, it feels like that's something that's just like spiritually within us, So yeah, I think that, and even thinking today too about like the impact that like immigrants and like other communities and marginalized communities have in our food supply and like tending to the land. Like I think because those are sort of like maybe masked processes that we're detached from when we just buy things from the grocery store, for instance, it's nice to call back that history.
Yeah, I feel like everybody has some sort of connection to the earth, and how could we not, because it's our home. And I think most people, like I put intersectional environmentalist, or I started using the word environmentalist because I want to reclaim it. But people don't have to use that language. I think if you're a human on Earth, you essentially are an environmentalist, whether you know it or not. So even if you're living in an apartment, like we're still in an ecosystem. So I think it's just helping people reconnect back to the land, because, I mean, even at the bare minimum, like just being outdoors does wonders for your mental health and your well-being, etc. So yeah, that's what I'm about right now, just helping people understand the relationship with the earth through whatever cultural context that may be.
Yes, yeah. One of my hopes is to take more walks this year, because I do, breathing and just sunlight is really medicinal. Mm-hmm. Do you have a favorite vista or terrain or park or trail that you like to visit? And
that's a good question. I don't really have a favorite. I really like Santa Cruz. Beautiful spot, but I was talking to your mom, I was like a park ranger in rural Kansas for 3 months. So I lived, and it was just like, I thought when I first got there, like, everything's flat, there's wheat fields. But then just being there for 3 months and seeing the beauty of just these like rolling wheat fields and like the silence. I was living in a town of like 25 people. So I would say the Midwest, where I'm from, is actually my favorite place to be.
Yeah, beautiful. And speaking of being a park ranger, I know that our national parks are like in this time of flux and under attack as it relates to just funding and the loss of jobs. And so like, I would like to ask you about the importance of a national park system and how these places are sort of like created and cultivated and tended to bring people into nature.
Yeah, so the history of the National Park Service is complicated, is a nice way to say it. Yeah, like when it comes to the displacement of indigenous peoples, etc. So I can't ignore that part of the history. Another part of it is also there's so many national historic sites within the National Park Service system. So again, where I was at Nicodemus, Kansas, which is the first town west of the Mississippi after slavery ended that freed African Americans went to and created this beautiful, thriving town. So there's so many sites like that spread across the United States that are also a part of the National Park Service system that deserve to be preserved and have those stories told. So I'm really sad about what's going on in the undervaluing of our park rangers. Not to be pessimistic, but the reality of it is, a lot of people are being let go because they want to open up that land for drilling and oil. So a very sad predicament that we're in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, speaking of a sad predicament, I do want to pivot to this January in Los Angeles and this conversation in part was really motivated by my interest in like deepening my knowledge of how something like these wildfires can happen on such a large scale, but also just like thinking about the community care we saw rise out of that moment, which felt really powerful. But I guess like to be more scientific, I'd love to just like talk more specifically about wildfires and like a climate event like that, like sort of how the speed of the Santa Ana winds and the dryness of the land here really took on a life of its own over that week. I can't even remember how many days exactly they were like not contained, but it was a long time, longer than anybody would have hoped, certainly. So yeah, I was just wondering if you could sort of like maybe explain your thoughts on how a climate event like that even happens and gets that out of control so quickly.
It was so scary, and I promise we're going to talk about other things too.
Yes.
So bear with me. Yeah, we have not done right by the land, and I love living in Los Angeles, but even where a lot of the homes are built are in areas that fire was normal. Like a lot of indigenous folks did kind of controlled burns and things like that. Certain plants, I'm like looking at my friend Nikki, who might know more than I do about this, but they need to actually burn in order to like rejuvenate, etc. So like fire is not necessarily a scary thing, but when it comes to Los Angeles and the rise of development and the ways cities are set up, unfortunately, a lot of places are in fire zones that are really vulnerable. And there's also so many other things when it comes to like investing in our firefighters. I think we should invest in them more than we do the police, in my opinion. We need to make sure they have the resources available. When we're looking at federally, a lot of, natural disaster recovery funding is being cut, which makes absolutely no sense. So I think the gist of it all is that natural disasters, which are pretty unnatural because of the climate crisis and the changing temperatures and not having the rainfall we were supposed to have, are going to occur more. So it's up to our elected officials that we should pressure locally and statewide to make sure we have the resources available. Because we didn't have it this time around. We didn't have enough water, which question mark, I hope everybody in Altadena sues. We didn't have enough water, we didn't have enough firefighters, and we didn't have the best resources to get people to evacuate. So I think it's time for us to learn from that because this unfortunately is kind of the reality.
Totally. And because it is the reality, and like I'm sure things will certainly continue to happen, unfortunately, do you have like any tips or best practices about how we can sort of mobilize and activate ourselves in the interim so it's not purely a reaction to like an urgent moment, but maybe over just in daily life or over the course of time, we can sort of like work to create communities or like resources or share things that just have us more prepared and equipped in the future?
I feel like Los Angeles is such a special city. I've never seen a disaster response like that in all of my life. Like the way this city got together. I know people talk about LA, like there's so many artists and creatives and people, but you're talking about a lot of people that don't mind being seen or perceived. So it's almost like this positive mutual aid peer pressure. And I'm like, okay, well, it seems like, we got us. So, I mean, that was beautiful. So many donation centers were overflowing that they had to turn things away. So I think it was a wake-up call about mutual aid and understanding, again, that, maybe there might not be the same amount of resources from the federal government, but what can we do? And I think it's up to us to find like who is the grassroots organization in my community that I can get involved with. So whether it's a community garden or honestly, whatever your skills are. I used to work at a nonprofit, and one of my mentors always said like, well, every nonprofit needs an accountant. And when I started one, I realized, because I was like, I don't understand what compliance is. So if you're an accountant, there's a nonprofit who needs help. If you're a graphic designer, there's a nonprofit that needs graphic design skills. If you're a marketer, please help that community garden get more members, etc. So really just applying the skills that you have to the movements that you care about locally. And if I had like one thing for y'all to do after this conversation is just figure out like who's my local grassroots organization. And then volunteer, even if it's like once a quarter, once a year, anything, they need your support.
That's great advice, thank you. And I was thinking of you too, because I feel like there was such an intersectional conversation happening about the Pacific Palisades and Altadena being like very different demographics, socioeconomically, racially. And so I think this was like, unfortunately, a really sort of like important reminder that even though the loss for everyone was massive and devastating, there are ways to sort of like bring intersectionality into the conversation that need to be had, because the impact just feels different for some people, I wanted to ask you too about just circling back to like indigenous knowledge and land management. If you could speak to that and sort of how we can maybe, because I was like thinking, again, like this is my brand of optimism, but I just become very spiritual and just go, I think of like the message beyond us and like beyond this life almost. And so when I thought about fire, I thought about its cleansing quality too, and the fact that it can purify, and like sometimes to rebuild, we do need that like full, like you say, even with the plants, and like we get super blooms after the land is burned, And so I was thinking about that almost on like, a soul level, where it's like sometimes we do need for things to like become ruins to like really rebuild in a more beautiful way. So I look to the indigenous community and population with that line of thinking in ways to like how can we just clear things out to to like let the bloom come.
That's beautiful.
No, thanks. I guess that wasn't a question, but maybe just a thought. I wanted to also bring up the fact that there's the Altadena Seed Library, and just thinking too about the importance of native plants and like our local Los Angeles sort of community. Like if you have any thoughts about like the importance of just like preparing seeds and like sharing them and making sure that like native plants are like protected in certain areas.
Yeah, so whether we're talking about like fire resistance and resilience, like having native plants that are again like used to fire is really important, because a lot of plants that aren't native or aren't from here might burn really easily or spread fires faster. And then I'm honestly, this is kind of new for me. Like I went on like a little foraging workshop and just started to get to know what plants are around me. So that is something that's new for me, and I want to learn a lot more. But unfortunately, like a not so fun fact that I learned. So like I love mustard. Everybody's probably seen mustard, like the yellow little plants on the little twigs. Those aren't from here, and they're really bad.
Oh, wow. Okay, good to know. I love mustard too.
If you see mustard on the trail, it's just like, pull it out.
I know part of this conversation too is just like you're such a creative person and so like culturally community minded and driven. And so like how do we maybe take the hyper scientific and like maybe like lofty, almost like academic level of environmentalism away and like just kind of make it fun? Like how do you sort of just relax into your role and sort of like bond and connect with people about the environment in a way that is optimistic and is just sort of relaxed and casual and enjoyable without being too heavy-handed maybe?
Yeah, like what's the use of all this climate science if nobody can understand it? Or what's the use of like a ton of research if only like a couple people in the lab can read it and comprehend it? And I think that's the thing that frustrates me about academia sometimes. And I've really struggled. Like I post on social media, I'll make infographics, I'll make reels again. And there are some people in my field who are like, why do you have so many colorful graphics? Or like, why are you doing this? Yada, yada, yada. But again, like, don't we want people to know this information? So I think you're only as smart as you can break down information. I need to say that in another way and articulate it better, but I feel like it's actually a sign of your like emotional intelligence if you can break down things for people to hear. And I don't like when people say that's dumbing down information. No, you're just being like smooth with your words because you want to bring as many people to the table. So I do that. Like, I've spoken at churches. I'm not particularly religious, but I'm like, there might be some people here where saying climate change could be a barrier to entry. And to them, if they think God is mad at the earth, and they don't believe in climate change, but they think God is mad at the earth and that's why they want to recycle, who am I to judge? So all roads can lead to environmentalism if you're willing to make those roads accessible for people.
Totally. Yeah, and I'm thinking about your role as an organizer and as a leader in this space and wondering what it's been like to forge your own path and if you've gotten support or like what it's been like to sort of like be a Black woman and be very front facing in person and online, and having to sort of navigate this responsibility of like sharing knowledge and spreading education, but also just like, I don't know, creating content, which is time consuming, and like all of these things that go into the work you do. Like, how has it been sort of like cultivating a team or a community or like just getting support in your mission?
I feel like over time I've really found my people, and I've found the people who aren't my people. And then I've realized that the people who aren't my people are the folks that like want me and other organizers to be like exhausted, because there's certain movement spaces where it's like, joy, you can't experience that. And I'm like, that's not healthy. So yeah, I really believe in like reciprocal relationships with people. At Intersectional Environmentalists, we call it like cyclical amplification. We just like making up words, as you can probably see.
Love it.
But that basically means like, okay, so, you know, when I wrote this book, I was like, this is a big deal. I'm a Black woman. I'm about to write a book. Let me find 20 other people who can be in this book. So there's going to be Jose Gonzalez from Latino Outdoors. There's going to be Patty Gonia, the outdoor drag queen, represent. There's going to be Teresa Baker, who does outdoor stuff. So there's like, how can we, if I'm having even a little bit of spotlight, how can I shine that on a bunch of other people? And then when we're in community, we do that together. So it's called cyclical amplification and not just one person rising to the top. It's like we got to, you know, be a system, be a community built out of reciprocity.
Yeah, and you being cognizant of like people wanting you to be exhausted feels so, that's unfortunate, but it feels like such a narrative of like, particularly the Black female experience historically in movements, like, you know, and like just needing support and sometimes not getting it, but figuring it out your own way. Can you also tell us about Earth Sessions, your other creation? Because I love that you have such a multi-pronged approach to your like central work and like the animating question of what you do, but I'd love to hear more about that along with Intersectional Environmentalist.
Yeah, so I love music. When I was living in Ventura, I just took like guitar lessons with like 60-year-olds. I don't know. It was really fun. And yeah, I just love music and art. My family is very theatrical. So I wanted to find a way to help musicians work with their audiences to learn about environmentalism. So I specifically work with like hip hop, alternative R&B artists, etc. Because there's amazing folks like Billie Eilish and Coldplay and Jack Johnson that are like really into the environment. But again, like cultural competency is really important to me. So I just started this kind of experimental program, and we've worked with folks like Earth Gang, Ravina, Umi, and some other like alternative R&B artists, etc. And we like pop up, do these intimate kind of listening sessions and events and block parties and things. And for most of our people, you know, up to 80%, it's their first environmental event. So that feels really good to me because I want everybody again to feel like an environmentalist.
Yeah, absolutely. That was the bulk of my questions for you, but I'm sure we could talk so much longer about so much. But I guess I just want to sort of end the conversation by asking how you are and how you're feeling this year and in this moment. I think we all know the start to this year was heavy and fast and slow at the same time and just like very intense in ways. And so, yeah, I'd just love to check in on you and see how you're like feeling on this new moon in Pisces evening, what you'd like to claim and manifest for the rest of your year and just like see happen.
I'm chilling. Honestly, I'm angry at the current predicament because I think Black women showed up in a very particular way and said that we don't want certain things to happen. So I feel very confident in myself that I was not involved in the chaos that is descending upon us. Yeah. So I've been crafting. I just learned how to dye with florals. I'm baking bread. I'm doing all these things because I know that, we're going to have to take care of us because of the current predicament that we're in. So it's strange. It's a weird duality, but I feel okay because I know that my people and my community did not cause this predicament, but I'm also mentally preparing to get ready for the resistance that's going to have to happen.
Absolutely. And crafting and working with your hands and just like turning off your brain a little bit is so important as a healing modality and to just like stay afloat. So I love that you do that.
I made this necklace.
Beautiful. Yes. So pretty. Thank you so much, Leah.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, everybody.